Hello, everybody. Welcome to Pause for My Tell podcast. I'm your host, Shep the Snep, and I'm here again with the wonderful Chaotic for a third-part episode, possibly four. We'll see how long we go. Where we left off last time,
You're funny.
5-part episode. Where we left off last time, we were discussing after high school, his experience going into college, and dealing with ADHD and not being diagnosed, but later his journey and getting that diagnosed and how that's made a difference for him. So we're going to pick off after there. We're still in college life. I believe when you were in college, that was your first experience at a FurCon.
Yeah, it was. Kind of my furry life up to that point in college. Freshman year, I had kind of gotten into it a bit more with the IRC chat and all that fun junk. And then kind of after that, my sophomore year, I kind of started to fall off from that a little bit because it was just hard to maintain contact with all the coursework and everything, and struggling with ADHD and all that fun stuff that we talked about last time. And so kind of the first time I had went to a convention was between my freshman and sophomore year of college, kind of that summer break. I had really wanted to go to Anthrocon. And this would have been 2010. Yeah, 2010 Anthrocon. So quite a long time ago. I'm old, I'm sorry. And I really wanted to go, and my friends wanted to go, and they're like, we'll come pick you up. You just get the money to go. And I'm like, okay, that's a 7-hour drive. I can ride that with friends. Sure, fine. Problem was, I didn't have money. I'm a broke college student. What does a broke college student do when they want to do something? You got to find a job. So I had never had a job before up to this point. And so in order to go to this con, I was going to have to make some money. So I decided the census is happening this summer. I'm going to go see if I can be a census worker. So I applied to the census. And, I'd like to think that everybody knows what the census is. But if you don't know what the census is, if you didn't pay attention in school, every 10 years, the United States performs a national census of everybody in the country. And it's to determine things like where your tax money is going to go, depending on how many people live where and whatnot. So every 10 years, you're going to get paperwork in the mail that asks you who you are, where you live, how many people are in your house, your nationalities, your age, whatnot. And that's how you determine where your tax money gets spent. So it's very important. It's against the law to not fill it out, actually. It is a federal crime to not fill out the census. Not that anybody's ever been charged with it. But so I applied to the census and got hired. And that was really my first job, which was fun with my ADHD. So I worked for 3 months in the census in the summer. It was a temporary gig, but I had gotten a lot of experience working that, and I learned a lot about myself doing it. So I had the unfortunate position of working with a bunch of adults who were much older than I am. I was 18 at the time, and I was working with a bunch of people who were in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. There was nobody I could relate to. And during the training for the census, they determined that it was a good idea to make me an assistant manager to all these people. And not many people liked the fact that their assistant manager was younger than them by a good deal. But it was only because that I understood the process of how to fill out the paperwork, because I was the only one who paid attention, I guess. It was new for me, so it was novel, and ADHD liked that enough that I could spend the 2-day training to learn how to do this. The unfortunate part was that my manager was a paramedic at night and worked the census during the day and was a diabetic. So this man would drive an hour at night to go work as an ambulance in the big city, work all night, and then come and work the census I don't know when he slept. And there was plenty of times where I would come to work and he's like having a diabetic shock from the stress of not sleeping. And so I would have to take on his job role too. And having to do the census, to do my own caseload of going around knocking on doors of people who didn't fill out their forms, while also keeping track of all the people under me, making sure they fill out their forms, making sure that they've not made errors on them, doing all these roles, going to the manager meetings, doing everything. The summer kind of flew by really fast, but I got to learn a lot about myself and how to interact with people who, well, one, were a lot older than I am, and two, how to actually work in a team at this job, to the point that by the end of the census, our region that I managed by that point was one of the highest performing regions in the entire area of like Chicago and Illinois and Indiana. And it was a really good experience for me. Never want to do it again. Fuck that life. But that was the only way that I could make money for this con. So I did that. I probably made, after all my expenses and whatnot, like, I don't know, like $1,000 to go to the con, which was, I mean, a good chunk of change back then. I probably could have got part of a first with that back then. Kind of regret not doing that. But anyway, so time to go to Anthrocon. My friends who I'd only known up till online at this point drive to my house in the middle of nowhere in Indiana. One of them was from Canada. One of them was from, I think, like Texas. One of them was from Tennessee. These people had driven all over just to come pick me up to take me to the con with them. And so my mother didn't like that very much. I had to fight her on this tooth and nail to go to this con. But
so what was that like? Were you able to like describe that to your mom? Like how did you present that in a way that she would allow you to go?
So mom wanted to know where I was going, of course. And I said, okay, I'll show you the website for it. She took one look at the Anthrocon website. And I think that year was like a dinosaur theme, like an old dinosaurish time period theme. And she looked at it and she's like, oh, it's a science fiction convention. I'm like, yes, it's a science fiction convention.
So she didn't really go digging.
Yes, there's nothing more. Don't look any further. That's what it is. Yes. It was not a science fiction convention. And so, but she didn't like the fact that 4 people or 3 people I'd never met were coming to our house to pick me up in the middle of the night to take her son halfway across the country. And that took a lot of convincing to get it to happen, to the point that I just said, you know, even if you don't love me, I'm just going to go do it anyway. Like, I made money to do this. You're not going to stop me. This is my money. I worked this job to do it. And she's like, okay, I guess. So
that probably had a bit of friction there then, I imagine.
It did. There was definitely some friction. But finally let me go and go to Anthrocon. I remember it very vividly because we stayed at the Omni Hotel in Pittsburgh. And the Omni Hotel is beautiful. At least the first floor is beautiful. But at the time that Anthrocon was going on, a large family had come from India to have a wedding there.
Oh, no.
At the Omni. So there are fursuiters walking by people who are dressed in the most immaculate wedding gowns I have ever seen. They're like gold inlay, everything. Everybody looks amazing. And then a fursuit walks by. And oh my God, the looks that fursuiters, oh, it was great. But this con taught me a lot of things because I had never really interacted with other furries in person up to this point. So suddenly going to a FurCon for the first time and seeing the, you know, the counterculture that is furry at the time, where, you know, people have green hair, or, you know, somebody's wearing, you know, a fake bra with all these inserts in it, or, you know, there's belly dancers, or there's people wearing pup hoods, or, you know, there's fetish gear all over the place. I had never encountered that before. It was like college all over again.
Was that your first con? Was those things like still there, Anthrocon 2020 or 2010, like pup hoods and things like that?
They weren't as prevalent, but they were there.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like, they may not have been the modern inclination of it, but there were definitely stuff like that there. I mean, there wasn't a lot of like the rubber stuff. That wasn't as prevalent, but just the regular kink gear, like, you know, leather, bondage stuff, that was still there.
So was that like open furry con, or is that like after hours type thing? Because Anthrocon is generally considered a fairly family-friendly convention.
I mean, it was mostly the after hours stuff was that, but you still seen some of it during the day, if my memory serves me correct. And it's been a very long time. I may not be remembering it correctly. I don't know. But that was really my first experience with furry in person. And it was very enlightening, I suppose, is the term for it, because like I explained previously with the culture shock from college, this was another new culture shock. It was counterculture shock because now I'd gone from, getting used to all different kinds of cultures to suddenly the outcasts of society who had embraced that and had become, a better version of themselves and were showing that to other people, even when it may have been things that I had maybe previously considered to be taboo. And, but oh god, that was such a fun time. I didn't know a whole lot of people in person at the con, so my first con experience was really getting to know the con experience. So it was things like going to panels, it was, going to opening ceremonies, it was going to see the guests of honor, it was going to look through the dealer's den for half the day, it was going to the art auction, it was going to, so this is your first FurCon panel, or introduction to fursuiting 101, just the things that I would recommend to anyone who's going to a con for the first time is to do those things. Like it's very, you may not do them all the time at every con that you go to, but do them at least once, because that's kind of the history of furry, is these conventions, these panels, and they are really important, even if they may not seem to be, even if you may not go to 90% of the panels. Like nowadays, I can go to a FurCon and never go to a panel. But it's only because I've been to a lot of them before, and I generally know what's going to happen. But there's still some times where I'll go to one. But in terms of this first Anthrocon, I went to everything. I treated it like it was an event. I didn't really have people there to go see.
This first Anthrocon, so you didn't have really anyone to go see. It sounds like you had flown in, or you met up with some people that you had known, but it sounds like for the most part, they were just people that you shared a room with, and then you just went off on your own and did all the panels and just the con experience solo then.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, that was basically what I did, was that I kind of wandered around like I would normally do on a vacation and see the things, look at all the stuff. I probably inspected every dealer's table like 6 times, just because I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. And I mean, I got some cool stuff from the dealers den that year. I have this really cool wood block of Chaotic, but he's like in like kind of like Final Fantasy, like belts, leather-ish looking stuff, but it's on a wood block, and where they had traced it in and then like carved the outline into the wood block and then painted over it.
Oh wow,
it's really neat. But that was from my first Anthrocon. I still have some of the sketches that I got from back then. I definitely keep all my stuff, but this was also the time period where, like, Uncle Kage was still a huge thing among people. This was To the Ranting Griffin. But back then, they were still the big thing, so I went to see them. And, I went to, like, their charity events, their comedy panels. I mean, they were funny for the time period, I guess. But it was a good thing to experience a lot of this old stuff.
And Kage still has a very important role at AC. Like, he's still there at opening and closing ceremonies, helps out tremendously. So he's been around for quite a bit.
Then. I don't remember if he's still the chair or not. I haven't looked in a while, but I know he's still big on the staff. At least he's still at least partially one of the public faces of Furry. And he was definitely more so back then. But it was just kind of really cool to mingle among. I mean, even first that I didn't really make any friends while I was there, but it was cool to just be in that environment where I don't have to have, a mask on. I can be my true self, and people enjoy that. So it was a really eye-opening experience for me.
Was it awkward at first, like coming from, very conservative backgrounds, very rural backgrounds? I mean, you'd had a little bit of preparation being at college and seeing things being done differently, but was it a big culture shock, like just everything so different? Like, was it almost a little intimidating, or cause you to like shy up or pull in, or was that just freeing for you to see that?
It was definitely a lot more of a culture shock. Like I wasn't used to that kind of thing. Like you see, portrayals of stuff in movies. Like, you go to a club in a movie and everybody's like half naked and dancing on a pole or something. But then to see someone, in kink gear at a con for the first time, I didn't quite know what to make of that. And I was still, a lot more Christian focused back then, so it was kind of an eye-opening experience for me. I didn't know this was the thing that people did, and I didn't quite know how to process that at the time. So especially like half the dealer's room is devoted to the adult dealer's room. And so I would go in there and seeing things that are, like sex toys and whatnot, or various types of kink gear. And I'm like, what is all of this? I don't think I'd ever seen a sex toy up to that point in my life. And to suddenly have it everywhere, I don't even think I'd been into the adult store up to that point. And it was just a very new thing for me. And I had to grapple with, this is the people that I've chosen to hang out with. This is the kind of things that they do, versus my upbringing and everything that I'd ever known up to that point, plus what I had experienced in college between the two.
Now, has that continued to be your experience with most of the furries that you come encounter with, where it is very like adult focused? That tends to be, the main driver, or has your kind of, from your experience since then, has your opinions of like what furry is in general changed? Like, how did that first impression really kind of set the groundwork for you to understand what the community is?
Well, I talk about all this adult stuff that I saw at the convention, but that definitely wasn't the whole like general consensus there. There were definitely people that were just there for, the art. There were people there that were definitely all safe for work all the time. And there was a lot of different viewpoints on things. Like, I know I remember going to some art panels where, people shied away from talking about adult stuff. And I mean, even there was a Christian like furry fellowship. There was a mass there at the con. And so there were all these opposing viewpoints, but everybody was still mixed in all together. And that really started to make me think, why are these things taboo in modern culture? Why was I always taught that these were bad when people seem to be enjoying themselves doing it? Like, no one's hurting anything. What's the problem here? And it made me start to rethink a lot of my viewpoints on things. And while a lot of it is stuff that I don't think I would ever participate in myself, it made me think, why would I immediately think with my background and everything that this was wrong when it's obviously not? And it made me start to think even more about my upbringing and how indoctrinated almost I had been by all the viewpoints from back home and the things that I had never been exposed to and never allowed to have been exposed to. And it just kind of drew me to a lot more counterculture in my own life. But there was definitely a lot more than just that at the con in terms of people. Like, there were definitely wholesome stuff. There was a lot of families there. There was children there. And there was kind of something for everybody there. It didn't matter if you were only into adult stuff. There was still stuff for people who weren't. And I like that about furry, is that it's not just about, furry. It's not just about a kink. It's not just about the art. It's not just about, fursuit. It's all of it combined. And everybody can find their own niche in it and still be around everyone else. Whereas other things may be more cliquey, like sports, where, football is football, and you have a team and that's it. You don't like other people's teams, or, you have fantasy football and you don't like other people's, fantasy football players, whatnot. It feels like it's a lot more closed in. Whereas furry is a lot more accepting of differing viewpoints, even in the furry fandom.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that was probably one of the bigger shocks, actually, is, so you came from like a very shame-based upbringing culture where things just, you had to be a certain way, to then going to a con where just so many things were so broadly acceptable, and everybody was just, even though there were people that were different, people that were into different things, were in the fandom for different reasons, they were still all generally accepted. And just that diversity with that acceptance, was that what was so weird about it, coming from where you were previously from?
Yeah, like, it was really perplexing to me that I could be in the space where all these things that would socially be taboo in most places that I had known, just no one cared, and everybody was together with it, and everybody seemed to embrace it almost. And it was almost like diversity was the goal instead of, the antithesis to everything. So it made me challenge my beliefs a lot more because there was all this stuff that I had never seen, never interacted with before that I, 2 years before that would have thought, this is wrong. Why are people doing this? And all of a sudden now I'm here in this space where it's accepted and morally acceptable, sociable. People are interacting with it, having a good time, building new friendships with it. It was a community. And that whole having the diversity right in front of me really just made me think a lot more about my old beliefs, how wrong I was about things. And that was really one of the turning points that made me start to approach more furry stuff than, normie stuff where I grew up in. Is because now that I have seen this.
Before you go too much further, so define the term normie.
Oh God.
What's a normie?
You're going to ask that question. So I would consider a normie to be someone who doesn't experience this counterculture on the norm and stays mostly in the dredges of what society wants people to be. Like that they want you to conform, to be the family man, to have a steady job doing, something normal, to keep hitting my microphone, to, enjoy sports, to enjoy, chasing the opposite sex, to enjoy, getting, alcoholism or smoking or things that have been the popular medium for the past, 70, 100 years. Whereas furries were definitely cut from a different cloth on that subject and don't necessarily hold to the same traditional values as the rest of society. So it's much more of a counterculture movement like you would explain the hippies in the 60s, but a lot more accepting that I can tell, and generally viewed as different by people who aren't part of it. That's what I would consider a normie, I suppose, in this situation.
Oh, cool. So that was your first con experience. Any particular stories from your convention experience that you want to tell, or anything you remember from that first con that stands out?
Oh, I think the first night we were there was pretty memorable because the morning after the first night, I woke up in the arms of my friend who I was, we had a double bed room, and I was sleeping with my friend, and, I was sleeping. We weren't doing anything. But I woke up at like 6:30 in the morning, and I'm like, man, there's something really tight on me. What's going on? And I realized that this dude, he's very tall. He was very tall. He was a very big built person. And he had grasped me like a teddy bear with both arms around me and like was hugging me to his chest. I was up like not on top of him all the way, but like halfway off the bed, halfway on top of him. And he had a death grip on me. And I could not wake him up for the life of me.
So this wasn't even like a conscious thing. He just, someone's in bed. I'm, just
He
snug.
just did it while I was sleeping. I don't think he realized he was doing it. And I just woke up like this. I'm like, this is strange. I've never experienced this before. I kind of like this. But at the same time, I'm like, I'm in the arms of another man. Oh, God. Oh, geez, what's going on here? And I was like, do I wake him up? Do I get out of this? And I tried to wake him up, but I couldn't wake him up. He was just in a dead sleep. I couldn't wake him up, and I couldn't move because he had such a strong grip on me. And I'm like, well, I guess this is my life now, and tried to go back to sleep. And then when I woke up, he had gone, he got showered, he already went to the con space, and I'm like, interesting. This probably won't cause any problems down the road in my brain. But
so that experience, it was something that was memorable for you, and you describe yourself as ace. How do you and just the ace is a spectrum, right? So like you describe yourself as ace,
it's definitely a spectrum,
but there's a spectrum to that. So was that like something that made you question a lot about yourself, where you kind of see yourself? Like go into that a little bit.
It was kind of one of the moments where I didn't question it at the time. But later on, when I started to realize that, I guess I'm asexual, and of course it is a spectrum. So where I fall out on the spectrum is I don't have any attraction to people at all in real life, none, even my boyfriend, much to his behest. But I'm more attracted to like my kinks. Like that's where I can experience some attraction and arousal. It's just that, period. But I'm also very tactile. It's another problem with my body is I'm extremely ticklish, but I'm also very sensitive to touch. So waking up in the arms of another person like that, who was gripping me tight and, you know, gripping me like a teddy bear, I'm like, this is quite pleasant feeling. And my brain didn't quite know how to process that because that didn't ever happen before. But it was definitely one of the points in my life that I can say, yeah, I'm ace, but I can enjoy that. And it wasn't, you know, an arousing thing. It was just a comforting thing.
But from that experience and from future experiences, it sounds like you've kind of determined that when it comes to just attraction or just image or looks, like you're not really attracted to a person. When you see a person, they don't have clothes on. There's nothing that triggers in your head that's like, yes.
Yeah, there's nothing there.
But if there's like
I can watch the most gratuitous fan service anime ever and nothing.
But it sounds to me like if there's a kink involved or some kind of an action that's associated with something that you like, then those alarms can go off. Those sensations can trigger for you.
Yes. But it won't be the person themselves. It won't be their physiology. It won't be anything about them. It'll just be that particular thing that activates the neuron in the brain. And there we go. And I know a lot of people like that. I know it's definitely a common thing, at least around the people that I'm around. And that's what I would describe mine as. So that was definitely one of the building blocks.
Has that been difficult for you? I mean, we've talked about like your family relations and with your mom and stuff like that, who seems to be an integral part of your life. And maybe this is jumping ahead a bit, but has that, has you being on the A spectrum, has that caused issues with your family relationship with your mom, having to explain that, having to deal with expectations that maybe she's had, anything like that kind of come to mind?
If I could count all the times that she's asked me when I'm going to have children for her, I'd be rich. I'm fairly certain that she thought I was gay for the longest time because, you know, in most of college, I mostly hung around men. When I would go to these cons, I'd be around men all the time. When I went anywhere and did anything, all my friends were male, with the exception of like 2 or 3. And that's just how it happened. And even when I moved away from college and moved in with, or had some friends move in with me, they were all furries. They were all men. My mother would ask me all the time, "Are you sure you're not gay?" And she just kept asking that over and over, at least until I got a boyfriend. It came out that, you know, I have a boyfriend. But even then, not gay, just have a boyfriend. I find the two things to be different.
Well, and that might be hard for like your typical normie to grasp, or somebody that's not really like in these kinds of circles, to where how can you have a boyfriend and not be gay as a male? Like, how does that work? To most people, that's very hard to like comprehend. Like, and you've done a really good job explaining that, but I don't know if that's something that you want to just help kind of elaborate on a little bit more. How does that relationship work? I know we're getting ahead, but it's really interesting. Like, how do you, as a person that's on the A spectrum, that doesn't have these attractions towards really any gender, or how does that work for you to have a boyfriend but not be gay, just to be like asexual?
At, you know, relationships, if you look at that, like there's a component of the relationship that is the companionship. It's not just the sexual aspect of it. And like when you're married, you're marrying a partner for life generally. And that's got to be somebody you can live with, I hope, for the rest of your life. And that was a problem that my mother taught me at an early age, not through her words, not through her actions, but through her history. Because since she never got together with my father, that caused a lot of problems in my life. And so I never had a father figure growing up. I never learned all that stuff. So when it came time for me to think about relationships, I'm like, what really is a relationship? If I don't have an attraction to another person sexually, and I'm not going to build a family, like what is the actual core part of a relationship? And it's really the companionship that you want in a relationship. Whereas I would consider someone who's, a normie that might say, oh, well, I'm attracted to this person. Well, okay. Are you going to live with them for the rest of your life? Is that why you're getting married to them? Are you married to them for the attraction? Are you there, for, the favors they give you? Are you there for both? Whereas in my case, because I'm ace, I'm there for the companionship. Sure, I still need, satisfy the needs of my partner when it comes to, the sexual side of things. I can't ignore that, even if it's not something that myself needs. Like, I don't need that satisfaction, but my boyfriend might. And so I have to learn how to, to do that for him. But that's because I'm with him in a relationship. I want to make him happy. I want, his companionship. I want us to be together for our life. And so when it comes to that kind of thing, to be ace and say, I still have a boyfriend. Well, I'm not there for sex. I'm there because he's a really cool person that I want to spend the rest of my life with. And that's what I think with that spectrum, like that's how it works for me. That's how I've always thought about it. And even when we first started our relationship, I explained that to him at the start. I'm like, look, I don't find anyone attractive. I probably never will find you attractive, at least sexually speaking. But because you're a witty person who enjoys books and you love traveling and you like all these things, we have all this stuff in common. We came from similar backgrounds. Like, you're someone that I could see myself spending the rest of my life with, and that's why I love you, and that's why I want to be with you. It's sure you may not, make my pants tent, but that's not what I need in a relationship. I need the companionship.
Well, and the fact that you're so open about it and communicate that with them, like that sounds incredibly healthy for any relationship, really. So,
yeah, that's kind of what we built our relationship on. Was I saw the failures of my parents and said, I'm not going to let that happen in my life. And even if I'm disorganized in every other aspect of my life, I'm going to communicate with my partner everything, even things that we may not necessarily want to communicate with each other at sometimes, but that's why our relationship has worked, because we have the communication that even when we've had a problem with each other, it's usually solved before we go to bed. Like, I'm very much a proponent of never go to bed angry, because that's how my parents broke up. Was they would get angry. They wouldn't talk to each other. They would, give each other silent treatment. Like, that's not healthy. And that's no way to act like an adult. Like, you sit down and talk to people about your problems. And that's what our relationship was built on. And that's why we've worked so great over the years. I mean, I've only known him since how we started talking the day that lockdown started, the pandemic. That's the first day that I talked to my boyfriend. And, that whole long distance relationship, the only way that we can make that work was communication. We didn't have the physical aspect. I couldn't just go into his room and talk to him. Like, we had to set aside time to do that. And when it came to my mom and my stepdad, like, they fight all the time. And they don't communicate. They yell at each other. That is their method of communication. And seeing that over the years just made me realize that that's not any way to live. And that if I wanted to have happiness for myself, I needed to find somebody who could accept that, and to be able to communicate with them and not be afraid to be insecure with me, and for me to be open with them about everything.
yeah, that is absolutely.
I know we got totally off topic.
No, I
there,
know
but,
but that's absolutely incredible. And we'll get to that part where you met, and we can go into maybe some more of those stories. But I just, the romantic in me is just like, but so back on where we were though. Like, so you finished your con. College came and you finished college. Well, I imagine, like, you told most of the college stories that you wanted to get out. What happened after college? Like, where did you go? How did life treat you? You're just getting your foot wet in the furry fandom. Let's go from there.
So, and by that point, by the time I was getting close to graduating college, I'd been to a few cons at that point. Like, I had started with Anthrocon that first year, between freshman and sophomore, and then kind of like went to Anthrocon again the next year, I think, if I remember correctly. I know I went a couple times. And I started to get a different group of friends by that point. I had different furry friends online. I kind of moved away from the more Christian fur friend side of the fandom and got into more of the kink side, where a lot of my friends were in the same kinks that I were. And that was the thing that we bonded over. And that's how I got to know them, was through my kinks. And they weren't just, someone I could do something with. There's a person behind that kink, and that's who I wanted to get to know. So I picked up a new friend group at that point, and kind of like my senior year of college, I went to several more cons. I went to MFF. I went to the last Fur Fright. I got chased away from Fur Fright by Hurricane Sandy. And God, that was an experience. But kind of near the end of my college, I had gotten a job at college at that point. I was working at the college library, doing kind of one of the craziest jobs I can think of at a college library, scanning rare books, because our college library is quite big.
The nerd in elementary school that was in the library all the time, reading all the books, ended up getting a job at the library, reading or working with not just books, but rare books. Like, that must have been a dream come true in a sense.
Yes and no, because while I say books, what I actually mean is dictionaries. So the only reason I got the job in the first place was because I had worked for my mother, because my mother was a politician at one point, and I'd worked in her office as doing scanning of books. And the only reason I got this job at the library at college because I had that scanner experience. So I went there, and they're like, here, you're going to scan these books. By the way, all of our collection of books is the largest collection of dictionaries in the world. So I'm like, okay, not books, dictionaries.
That's quite a
I guess.
a bragging point right there. We're the #1 dictionary library in the world.
It was. It was. And I'm sure from that you can probably find out where I went to college. But yeah, that was their claim to fame, was they had the largest collection of dictionaries in the world. And I was there to scan them, at least the ones that they hadn't yet digitized. And when I say dictionaries, what I mean is the first day on the job, this is the very first book I had scanned. They had barely trained me yet. And I come into a room that has a scanner. It's a dark room. And their scanner is 2 cameras that point at a glass sheet that, you can push down this glass sheet onto a book. And the books are like the size of this table, maybe. Like, they're not small books. But this book, the first book they give me to scan, is also the rarest book in their collection because it's the oldest book in their collection from 1492.
Wow.
This book they handed me was handwritten on sheepskin paper from 1492, written at the Vatican, no less, by a priest who was translating Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek so the priests could learn how to read Hebrew in the time period. And so I had to handle this book that was over 600 years old, or 500 years old. And I'm like, what? I don't know about this. They didn't even give me gloves.
Wow.
Like, I'm just handling a piece of history. Like, it had the whole gold foil first paragraph letter in it, everything. Like, it looked straight out of the medieval time period. It was gold inlay. It was fanciest thing I've ever seen in my life in terms of a book. And that was the first day on the job. But the rest of the books were not quite so extravagant. It was a lot of things like scanning atlases of the local area, scanning lots of dictionaries, scanning tax records. I mean, it wasn't glamorous. The atlases were at least interesting because they contained the history of the local area. A lot of the old people, the first settlers of the area, were in these atlases. They would have their pictures in them. They would pay someone to go around to every farmstead and offer to sketch their family portrait to put that in the atlas and put a little blurb about their family. These things were really neat. And I could see over time as I scanned them, the history of the area as it happened every year. There would be new maps. There would be new families. There would be new stuff. And so I got to learn a lot at this job about where I grew up, basically. You never thought that scanning rare books at a library, you're going to learn the entire history, depending on where you grew up at. But here we are. And then to top it all off, the last day on the job, where I lived, where I went to university, since, I mean, the cat's out of the bag now of that claim, I went to university in Terre Haute, Indiana. And In the 1920s, little history lesson here, Terre Haute, Indiana was basically what Las Vegas is today. It was a large red light district. The mob had a big presence in the town. And during the Prohibition period, they dug lots of tunnels everywhere in town to get around, their distilleries and their illegal bars and everything, or speakeasies. And the mob had a huge hand in that. And after Prohibition, most of those tunnels were forgotten about. Well, it causes lots of problems with construction because stuff falls into those tunnels all the time. Nobody knows where they all are. There's no maps. So there's probably like treasure hidden down there. There may be stolen works of art. There may be gold. There may be jewels. There may be, bottles of booze from the time period still down there. There may be dead people. Who knows? But the last day of the job at this library, somebody brings in this big parchment piece, this big paper from the 1930s. And they're like, I found this in my grandpa's closet. It looked interesting, so I thought I'd bring it in for you guys to scan, see what it is. And so we roll it out on the table. It's as big as this table. It's huge. And it just looks like a map of Terre Haute from the 1930s. But there's lots of handwritten marks on it. And I had known from scanning all these atlases that these marks shouldn't be there. This is not what it looked like in that time period. And all the other librarians were like, well, it just looks like somebody scribbled on the map, blah, 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 whatnot. No, it's just a map from the 1930s. Boo-hoo. Sorry, it's not anything fancy. But the part of me who had scanned all these atlases and learned about all these mobsters by reading all these atlases and seeing all the stuff that I'd scanned over the years, I had remembered that the one map of the tunnels that we do have from the modern day, from stuff falling into them, I made the librarians go fetch that map, and we overlaid that onto this map that this guy had brought in. And every little scribble line on this map matched up with the location of a known tunnel. So what I had actually found, that none of the other librarians had noticed, was that this was a map of the tunnels from Prohibition, and probably the entrances that people didn't know about that are in the basements of old buildings downtown that had been boarded up or, dug over, that this was the actual map to the tunnels, and no one had ever found that before.
Oh, wow.
And I had literally found a treasure map.
Yeah, you found a modern day treasure map. Like that's crazy. Like, did anything happen with that, or did it just kind of like, that's cool?
Know. That was my last day on the job.
Oh, no.
I literally walked out the door 15 minutes later. I don't know what became of it. But I just know that, man, I've literally found a treasure map. I could go find all this shit. So that job gave me no end of surprises. So that was fun. But after that, when I graduated college, I had kind of stayed at home for a few months. I didn't know what I could do. I had graduated with a degree in information technology. I had a couple computer certifications. I wanted to get a job, building computers, doing stuff like that, working in a data center, whatnot. I wanted to do that kind of thing. And I had put out applications everywhere. This was also the time period of the Great Recession, so nobody was hiring anymore. I couldn't even get a job at McDonald's. Like, I had applied to everywhere.
Well, especially where you were living, right? If you are in a rural area and you have a job in IT, like, what kind of prospects are there?
None. That was it. There wasn't anything around there as far as computers. Like, you either worked at a small computer repair shop or for a large factory, and that was it. And none of those jobs were open. I couldn't find anything. So I said, okay, what am I going to do? And I kept the people at the library learned, like, the last week that I worked there, that I had experience. I had a couple classes on building websites. And so they're like, we're going to keep you on building websites now. You're going to do this for us now. So they somehow petitioned the school to allow me to stay there as a student worker, even though I wasn't a student anymore, which is weird. But so I kept working there. And since my mom was a politician, she had, various company vendors that came in to service their systems at their office and whatnot. And she had taken me with her to one of their, like, user group meetings just to help her drive because she was going to get drunk and, needed a driver to take her home. And while I was there, I was given a tour of one of these companies, kind of like computer areas because I was bored. And they're like, well, come look at our stuff. I'm like, well, this is a lot of cool shit. I wish I could work here. And by cool shit, I mean one server rack in a closet. It wasn't anything crazy. But for me, this was the cool shit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh my God, I've never seen a server rack before. Me who had certifications in IT and went to school. Like, we never worked on anything like that. I'm like, damn, this is cool. I could see myself doing something like this. And so they had called my mom to get my resume because they had seen me, they just thought of me or something. I don't know.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of this thing where it kind of fell into my lap where they're like, hey, submit your application.
To this day, okay. No one has ever asked me for my resume. So that's really cool.
I know, right? Like, literally fell into my lap. I had done nothing to deserve this, but this was the one thing in my life that just worked out. And I was able to get a job with them at this place. And so I moved up to Indianapolis. I basically had to move there the next day and found a small apartment and moved in over that weekend and started work on that Monday. I'd gotten the job offer on Friday.
So and I want to emphasize this because this can be really difficult for a lot of people, especially leaving like to the unknown. You just pretty much like you got a new job and you just packed up and went.
Literally the next day. Like, got the job offer on Friday, found an apartment on Saturday, moved in on Sunday, started work Monday.
Wow.
At a place that was 90 miles from home. Like, it wasn't that far from home, but it was still a new place. Like, I had been to the city before. I'd been to Indianapolis, but I didn't live there. I didn't think I could live there. And now here I am in the city. Like, and it wasn't a bad part of town either. It was a pretty nice part of town. It's probably the best part of Indianapolis. And I had worked for this company, and then I worked for them for the next 10 years as an IT help desk person.
So how many years did you said 9 years?
I worked for them 10 years, almost to the day.
That's impressive.
But Great Recession at the time. I needed a job. I took the first thing that came along. It just happened to fall in my lap. I was very lucky, and I understand that. And but I worked at a company with a lot of people who were, again, a lot older than I am. I was fresh out of college, and the other person who was closest to me was 35. And so there's, that generation gap was definitely there. Yeah. All of them had families.
Well, and then the other thing is you had just picked up and you moved to a completely new place. I'm guessing no friends, no relatives. It's really just you in an apartment alone, and then you go to work, and then you come back and there's no one there. Like, how was that?
Like, I thought it was the best thing ever because no one was there to bother me. Like, at home, I mean, I was an only child until I was 12, but at that point, my mom had 3 kids. And my stepdad brought a kid with him into their marriage. And so I didn't really have siblings. I had people who I considered to be, nephews and nieces because I was so much older than them. So I helped raise my siblings. Like, I wasn't, their brother. I was basically their caretaker for a lot of the time when mom had to work or people were out, especially during school break. I really had to be the one to be there. And so I didn't really consider them to be, my brother and sister. They were more children that I had to help take care of. And so suddenly getting the chance to move into my own place alone, I'm like, oh my God, yes, please. I think the first thing I did when they shut the door and left was boot up League of Legends and play for,
You had a good old gaming session where you could do it uninterrupted.
Oh yeah. Uninterrupted. Like, I was living the bachelor life, uninterrupted. That was my coping mechanism. I would get online with my fur friends, play games, hang out in Skype calls by that point. We were on Skype at this point in my life. And So I would just come home, I'd play games, and, watch a little TV, go to bed. That was my routine. I was enjoying it. I was liking it. Occasionally, I would go to the local card game shop, try to make friends. I'd play Friday Night Magic. I'd try to meet people. I didn't, be a hermit. I tried to meet people, but I just couldn't make any lasting friendships. And then I tried like the local fur groups in Indianapolis. I tried that. I went to some of the fur meets. I tried to hang out with people. I tried to meet up with similar-minded people. I couldn't really find anybody who was into the same kinks I was, so I didn't have that avenue like I had before online. But all we had was the furry aspect. But it just didn't work with most people. I couldn't connect with them. I couldn't build a lasting friendship.
Was there any, just thinking back, because I've known other people and I've had my own experiences where local fur groups can be hit or miss, where, some people have a wonderful experience. They meet lifelong friends. They form their social circle, their community just from the local furs. But then I know other people where they've had similar experiences to you, where they just, for whatever reason, it just didn't click. And it sounds like you experienced that. Is there any insight you had on
Speaking
that?
of clicks,
Yeah.
A lot of the fur group that I'd seen in Indianapolis at the time period, and I mean, this is not anything at anyone. I'm not talking bad about anyone. It's just a lot of them were really cliquey. They all had their own little groups, and they kind of stayed with them. And it seemed to be like an evolution of high school into adulthood, where people kept that high school mentality of, people forming their own niches and cliques, and there just wasn't room for anybody else. So I would do things like go to the bowling meets and try to interact with people, but they all had their own place already. And it just got hard to meet people. So eventually, after about a year of trying, I gave up. And I resorted to my friends online. So I did become a hermit at that point. I kind of, after the first year being there, I had settled into the routine of going to work, coming home, hanging out on Skype, doing games, whatnot, going to bed. That was it.
So
pretty cheap lifestyle, actually, but
I want to go into that a little further though, because I feel like there's a lot of people out there, furries, that experience that. And that can be really kind of disheartening. You found something that you really enjoy. You meet people online that are really cool. And then the next step is you reach out to people that are close to you locally because you want to have that extra connection, and it just doesn't work out. That must have felt awful.
It did. It did. It definitely felt awful.
How did you get past that? What did you do to because obviously now you're very connected with a local community and you're very connected with a lot of friends and people online. How did you get past that? How did you push forward from that?
So back then, since all of my friends were online at that point, the only time I would ever see anybody in person was when I drove back to my college on the weekends sometimes to hang out with my friends who were still there. And that was kind of my local connection at that point still. But I still had to drive, an hour and a half to get there. And I wasn't in college anymore, so it's kind of weird just hanging around the college. It's a little weird, honestly. But in order to bridge that gap to, from there to where I'm at now, kind of the second year I was there, one of my friends online was having trouble with his family and whatnot. And I said, well, I've got space. I mean, I may have a one-bedroom apartment, but, you can come, sleep on the couch, I guess. And, just come move in with me. Well, so he flew out and kind of moved in with me. And for, a while, we had a lot of growing pains. They were a very clean, tidy person. I was not. I had to learn to keep that in mind when, doing stuff with them. I had to learn to be a lot cleaner. And I struggled with that for a long time because I was still undiagnosed ADHD at this point. And it was just very hard to remember to do chores. And that would, make them unhappy, rightfully so. I left dishes in the sink. They're stinky, they're dirty. Anybody would be angry about that. And so we had to work a lot of that stuff out. And I kept falling into that trap over and over again.
How did you get to the point where you knew it was okay to invite an online friend to come in and move with you? Because I know for a lot of people that can be a very, very scary thing. you hear stories about, at least when I was growing up, it was always like, oh, stay away from online people. You don't really know them. They could be spooky. But like, how did you like get to that point where you felt like you had enough trust in this person where you could invite them, and how they must have had that same trust if they were willing to also like move from where they were at to come move in with you. Like, do you want to explain that? Like,
I mean, at this point, at this point, I had known them online since my junior year of college. Like, I had known them for 3 or 4 years now. And we had gone to cons together. So it's not like they were just some rando online that I talked to. Like, I had been to conventions with them, so I had seen them in person. I kind of, knew a little bit about how they acted. And that was okay. So I had no hesitation with inviting them into my home. And, I mean, that may have been different if it was somebody that I had only met online and didn't really have any interaction with in person. I may have been a bit more hesitant about that, but I didn't. And it was just kind of at that point where I'm like, okay, this is fine. You can come live with me till you get on your feet. There was this expectation that we weren't going to be there forever together. And, that once they got on their feet, they would get their own place. I'd have a cool friend now to live nearby, and we'd be able to do things, and we'd, live our lives together. And so they moved in, and we kind of kept going with their life. I tried to help them get on their feet, and they were an artist, so they, did our commissions and whatnot. And a couple of years went by, and by that point, I had another friend who was having kind of similar issues. And I'm like, well, why don't we get a 2-bedroom and you come move in with me? So we got a second person to move in who was, mutual friend. We'd talked together online for years. Again, I'd been to conventions with this person, and they, they were the best friends with the other roommate that I had. So, I mean, it was just kind of natural at that point. So I made the 2-week trek across the U.S. with them. We actually went to Further Confusion as part of this trip to move them out here. But this was also the first time that I had been west of Indiana. I had never seen the rest of the country to the west. I had been, to cons on the East Coast, but I'd never been west of the Mississippi River. So this trip that we had to move both him out there and to get my other roommate's stuff from their house in California to move back, this was also a new experience for me. And we drove across the U.S. over the course of 2 weeks in the winter. We had driven, I remember it very well because we drove from Indianapolis to Tulsa, Oklahoma. From Tulsa, Oklahoma, the next day to Albuquerque, New Mexico. And from Albuquerque, New Mexico, we went to Vegas. We stayed a day in Vegas because, why wouldn't you stay a day in Vegas?
True.
And from Vegas, we went up to San Jose, California to go to Further Confusion. And after that, after experiencing a West Coast con that was even more different from an East Coast con because it's, West Coast. We went back down to my friend's house, picked up his stuff, met his parents, and then drove up to Seattle to get my other friend's stuff out of his house and move him back. And, drove back from Seattle to Idaho, from Idaho to Colorado, from Colorado to Kansas and back. So we went all the way around the U.S. for the most part.
So you're like, these local furs, they're okay, but I'm not clicking with them. I'm going to go pull my friend from California and then my friend from Washington, and I'm going to bring them home to me.
Yeah, that's kind of what happened in the end. I mean, if I had the same choice again, I may have tried harder with local furs. Because, I'd only really scratched the surface with them, and I never really had anybody over at my house. I'd just been kind of scouting people at events to see who I would mesh with. And there were some of them that I meshed okay with, but not really enough that I'm like, well, I didn't really feel comfortable around them. And that was really what I based my thing on. Whereas if I could go back and do it again, I probably would have tried a bit differently. I probably would have just had people over, met them for lunch or something instead of at an event. Where that probably was my problem, was that I didn't, I only went to them when, we're at a Furry or we're at a bowling event or something. Where it's really hard to get that one-on-one with people. You don't really get to know them unless you already do know them. Mm-hmm. And that would be my, advice to people in this kind of situation is don't just rely on the events in the area. You need to organize things with other people to get that personal connection.
Yeah, it sounds like whether local or not, you were very proactive in making, those relationships happen?
Like I didn't want to be alone forever. Like, sure, I enjoyed the lifestyle, but it gets kind of lonely at night. And not that I was looking, for a relationship or anything. I just, wanted people around, because I'd had that in college with, dorm mates in college, and being around people all the time, I had grown accustomed to it. And I just wanted that companionship, really. So that's what we kind of built. I kind of built my own family with these people. And we got really close. I would help pay for things when I could. And, we'd cook our meals together. We kind of did most things together. We really were a family.
So, like, how long were you guys, sharing a place together? Being like this kind of familiar relationship. Like, was it just like a few years, a couple years, or was this like almost the entirety of your 10 years in Indiana?
Yeah, I think about 9, 10 years, give or take, nowadays. And it only kind of ended because I, found my romantic partner, and I wanted to, have a relationship with them. And it's a little hard to do when you have, other people in the house.
So I want to go into this a little bit more, because there's this idea that you hear about found family, especially in like LGBTQ individuals. You hear this concept, found family, and it sounds like for you, that's essentially what you had. Would you like describe what that means to you, and like how that term kind of applied to the relationship you had with these two friends that you had essentially invited to live with you?
So it really was, a family by that point. Like, we supported each other, we helped each other, we were each other's emotional rocks. Like, when somebody had a problem, I would try to do my best to fix it. Like, it wasn't like a friendship where, I need help moving or something, you go help somebody move. It was, well, I'm sick. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to drop everything I'm doing. We're going to get you, to the doctor. We're going to go to the hospital, whatnot. I need help building this thing. I need this, this administrative stuff done. I need help with my taxes. Like, I would help them do help with their taxes, because I learned how to do my own taxes in college out of necessity. And it would just be things like that, where I would try to help them where I could. And we would do most activities together as a unit. Like, we would go out on the weekend. One of my friends really liked air shows for airplanes. So we'd go to those when we could. Or, we'd do things like bowling when the mood struck, or we'd go out to a restaurant together all the time. We bought groceries together. We cooked as a unit, as a family. And it really felt like, they were the brothers that I never had. And so I didn't treat them as friends. They were family. Like, when we had problems, there was no expectation of, breaking it off. It was, no, we're going to fix this. We're a family. And so that was my found family. Like, it was just the people that I had chosen to spend my time with all the time. And we lived together, so that there was no other way that I could treat it. They were my family. They were the people that I would bend over backwards for.
To me, that's like such an incredible thing, 'cause especially coming from an environment where like family was everything, and the idea of other people filling the role of your non-biological family was a very foreign concept, especially for me coming into the fandom. So like hearing that story of how that worked so well for you is it's just I think that's really important for a lot of people to really understand, like how your friends kind of came together to kind of fill that need of a family unit, essentially. Like the way you describe it, like, yeah, it was a family.
It is a conscious decision. Like, everybody has to be involved and be invested in that concept for it to work, though. Like, if one person's not really into it, then it kind of falls apart. But it's also kind of a product of my upbringing, like, because I didn't have that father figure in my life. I didn't have the traditional family unit for the longest time. I didn't have those ingrained tendencies that may say, oh, well, these are just friends, I'm not going to, they're not, they're just roommates. No, that's not anything that was in my brain. I didn't have that tradition standard ingrained in me. And I wanted to treat them like I wanted to be treated. And I wanted family. So that's how I treated them. And So, I mean, it is a conscious decision that you have to make every day. Like, I have several other friends who are a found family on their own. And I know now that they live together. I think there's 4 or 5 people in their found family now. Of course, they're in more of a polygamous relationship, but it's still a family. Like, you still have to invest your time and effort and energy into it, the good and the bad. Like, you will fight. There will be squabbles. Like, people are human. We have problems. Like, I was still dirty and messy. Like, I would cause problems with that all the time. People would get angry at me that I didn't remember to do a chore or something. And ADHD or not, like, that doesn't negate their feeling. I still have to address that as a person in their unit. Like, so that was just kind of how it was that I gave my time of them, they gave their time of me, and we came together and we spent our lives together. We were a family. Whether it was, blood relation or not, I didn't care that they weren't my flesh and blood. Like, what does that even matter? Sure, I'd drop everything for my mother if she asked me to, and she would give me the shirt off her back. But that's only because of the time that I've spent with her. Whereas, like, my cousins or my uncles, like, I had a cousin die the other day. I didn't know who they were. I didn't care to go to their funeral. I probably met them once or twice, but I don't have a connection with them. And yet my family gets angry that I just didn't really care about that. I'm like, okay, do you care when a random stranger dies? Like, I don't mean to sound mean about that, but that's just the experience that I had.
Yeah.
It's that I didn't have that connection with them, so it didn't hurt me. So why should I feel tore up about it? Mm. Sure, I'm unhappy that someone in my family died. It's sad, it's tragic, but I'm not going to beat myself up over it. I'm not going to lose sleep over it. It happens. People die.
So essentially for you, family is not so much a blood thing. It's more of a connection thing.
And because that's what I had growing up with the split family. Like, my dad never invested any time in me. I didn't really consider him to be my father. He was just a person that I had to go see every 2 weeks. At the time when I was a kid, sure, he was my dad. But when I got older, I realized that we didn't really have any connection at all. And it made me think, like, what even is family? If this is family, like, why do we do this? And that was just my kind of philosophy about this. Like, I'm going to choose who I want in my family. And blood be damned, it doesn't matter. Because, sure, I popped out of somebody because, they loved somebody else and they had sex. Sure. Why does that immediately make me, chained to them as if I'm supposed to be their, emotional support, help, and servant their whole life? If I don't have a connection to them, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
There's no point. It's just the societal expectation that's there that because you're blood relative of somebody, you have to be family. Well, I don't have anything in relation with most of my family. I don't share any kind of connection with them. I don't share the same interests. I share some DNA. That's about it. And I mean, that may sound cold, but that's just the way that I've been, experienced over the years.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, like, you're already breaking social norms as it is being a furry. And so having the bravery, in my opinion, to do those things that are against what society wants, but that make more sense for you, that are healthier for you and give you better outcomes. I don't see that as a bad thing at all. I don't see that as some people may say, oh, well, it's selfish to go against your blood family. But really for you, you're doing the more mentally healthy thing where you are having people around you that are actually treating you as family and considering those people as your true family. And that's, I think, a very important thing for a lot of people. And also for a lot of blood families to really realize, like, hey, if I don't have a good relationship with my brother or my daughter or my parent, I don't need to necessarily force that relationship if it's toxic to me. And so it sounds like that's kind of where you're kind of, you've come to that conclusion where my family is going to be the people in my life that matter, that make a positive difference for my life, not just some person that, as you put it, that is related because you popped out of a womb and you share some of their DNA.
Yeah, like I know that's been the traditional family union for, since the dawn of time, but it doesn't have to be that way. Like, it's only tradition because we let it be tradition. So for me to go out and say, well, sure, you're my uncle, you live in Florida, I share your DNA, hi, I guess, I don't really know you, we don't really talk that often. And like, I've been closer in my family to my direct cousins that were, raised alongside me than I am to any of my other family members, because they're the people I spent time with. They're the people who I learned to know. And while my brother and sisters, like, sure, I know them, they're my brother and sisters. If they asked me to do something, I would do it. But that's only because I've been in their lives for so long and I have that connection with them. I may not call them, purposefully ever, because I forget about it. Another trait of ADHD, out of sight, out of mind. If I, don't see someone on a daily basis, I forget about them. And I don't remember them until they come up in some form of fashion, like on a feed, on a Facebook, on a Twitter somewhere. And that's when I remember, oh, hey, I need to call this person. And I only remember to call my mother every week because I have a timer on my phone set, Wednesdays after work, call mom. And if I didn't have it there, I wouldn't remember to call her, and she would call me angry.
Yep.
But that's just my ADHD side of it. It makes it hard to maintain social relationships like that. So this found family were the people that I invested my time into purposefully, and not with the intention of getting anything out of it, but because I enjoyed their company and their time, and I hoped that they would enjoy mine and reciprocate.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think with that, that's probably a good place, if you're okay, to stop this episode. We covered a lot of really important things, your relationship with your boyfriend, being ace, found family, really a great episode. And we'll continue this furthermore. I think next episode we can talk about, maybe your move to Seattle, before then, the pandemic and how you met your boyfriend. And then we can just talk about generally how Furry has made such a big difference to where you're at today. So thank you again, Chaotic. You've been a fantastic guest. Again, if you like what you've been watching, please hit the like and subscribe button, because that really helps us with that weird YouTube algorithm. And we're excited to have Chaotic on one more, hopefully just one. No, we can do a couple more. But yeah, stick around. We'll have another episode with Chaotic on the next episode. See ya.